All right, you guys know the situation at the border has gotten so bad, even the mainstream media, the legacy left-wing mainstream media has to cover it. It's not just the people coming in, though. That would be bad enough in terms of law and order. But it's what else is coming in. The drugs, the terrorism, the sexual predators, the former criminals. They're all coming in. So I'm excited to have a conversation to talk about what this really means for our national security, the impact it can have on our families and our communities with Chad Wolf. Chad was the former acting Homeland Security under President Trump. He's the co-host of the America First Policy Institute's the Tank podcast. He's the founder of Wolf Global Advisors and the executive director of America First Policy Institute that is doing such great work making sure that the next Republican president has the tools, the policies, the people in place when they take office. So without further ado, Chad Wolf. Chad, thanks for joining us today. I appreciate it.
Well, thanks for having me.
So I think part of the problem that concerns me about the border is I watch these folks come in. I hear the stories from the Border Patrol and the border chief about the concerns that we should have. But I then look at stuff like what CBS News is putting out, and they're calling people entering the country illegally, quote, coming in without authorization. And I think part of the problem is that, do you think that we are doing a disservice to the nation in how we're presenting the threat that we face at our southern border?
Yeah, I think that's right. Look, it's an attempt by this administration to somehow downplay what's going on along that border, right? It's no longer illegal activity. It's no longer illegal aliens. And again, alien is a defined term in immigration law. It's actually what Congress passed, calling these individuals aliens because they are not U.S. citizens. And so when they cross illegal, guess what? You become an illegal alien. And that's defined, again, in immigration law. And so what the Biden administration wants you to believe is none of that matters. Instead, we call them undocumented. Well, they're not undocumented. They're here illegally. A lot of them actually have documents. They're just not from this country. So this whole idea of trying to downplay what's going on along that border and trying to ignore U.S. law in the process is really quite surprising. And I think that, they've been at this now for 28 months, and I think they think it's working. And that we've got some of the legacy media picking up on this and using the same terminology as they are.
In fact, it's funny. Ralph Norman was on CNN with Jim Acosta, and let me kind of tell you. So he says, he basically says, have you been to the border? Acosta says, yes, I have. Have you seen what's going on north of Madison? And Acosta says, I'll ask the questions. The border is not open. That's something that is peddled as a talking point, but it's not true. There are fences, there are walls, there are border agents. That's Jim Acosta lecturing Congressman Ralph Norman. Do you think that the border is open?
Well, obviously the answer to that is yes. And Jim Acosta has the same talking points that Secretary Mayorkas has over at the Department of Homeland Security. And it doesn't really matter. I mean, his response to that is juvenile.
Have you been to the border?
Of course I have.
Have you seen what's going on? The rapes, it's open. I mean, nobody can deny that.
The border is,
and it's a crisis. Where?
I'll ask the question, sir. And the border is not open. That is something that is peddled as a talking point, but it's not true. There are fences, there are walls, there are Border Patrol agents who work on the border.
The 5+ million that have gotten into this country illegally is not a figment of our imagination. Ask the Border Patrol agents. Ask anybody down there. They're frustrated.
But I guess I haven't. You have not been able to answer my question as to how you effectively do border enforcement if you're shutting down the government. I guess we're not going to get an answer to that question.
It's juvenile in the sense to say, well, there's walls and there's fences and there's Border Patrol agents, so therefore it's not open. The problem is you can have all the walls that you want. You can have all the Border Patrol agents, but if you ignore the law and you don't enforce the law and you release people into the interior of the country at will, none of it matters. People are going to scale walls. They're going to climb over fences. Border Patrol is going to encounter thousands of folks as they are doing today. But this idea that you're just going to release them negates all of that enforcement activity that you have along that border, which is exactly has been the case for the last 28 months. So I kind of laugh, hearing Jim Acosta say that or hearing anyone on the left say that, because what that tells me is they don't understand the border. They've never been, or they've maybe been once, and so therefore they're a border expert. And they truly don't understand what's happening along that border, and the fact that you can have all the walls and all the fences that you want, but if you leave gates open and you allow individuals to come in and you don't remove them, none of it matters.
Well, I mean, that's the thing that I think is funny is that Acosta's saying, that's something that's peddled as a talking point. There are fences, there are walls. I can see with my own eyes what's happening at Eagle Pass. I don't need to, you can have, to your point, there can be a wall, there can be 10 fences. People are lifting up the wire, they're going under it, they're coming through the river. I don't think that, regardless of whether there is a wall, the question is, are they coming in and are they being stopped? And I think unequivocally the answer to that is no.
Oh, well, absolutely. The answer is no. And look, we can talk about Remain in Mexico. We can talk about a variety of different programs and policies. There's only one thing that matters, which is as those illegal aliens are coming into the United States, are they being released? And in this case, there are mass releases going on every single day because they are out of shelter space. And so what those individuals are doing is they get to where they want to go, whether it's New York City or Chicago or wherever else, they're calling back home and say, hey, I made it across the border. I was released in under 24 hours. You too can come. And that's why we continue to see these record numbers. And so again, it doesn't matter what kind of infrastructure, the concertina wire doesn't have, if you don't actually enforce the law, which the federal government is not doing, they are choosing to look the other way. This is what happens. And then on top of all of this, to designate Venezuelans and give them temporary protective status, TPS, which is a term of art in immigration law, you've basically said about 500,000 Venezuelans now get to reside here in the country. They get a work permit. They can't be deported. You're sending a signal to every other Venezuelan in the world, get here to the United States because you too will get this same status at some point under the Biden administration.
A lot of Republicans make fun of and point out that President Biden has never been to the border. As someone who led this effort, how important is it that he actually see it?
Well, it's critically important, but it's not just seeing it,
Right.
although that's a start. It's actually talking to Border Patrol agents and experts down there, listening to them, asking them hard questions, trying to understand what are the problems facing them, because these are not shy individuals. They will tell you exactly what is going on down there, and they will tell you exactly what they need. And I think that's why he hasn't visited. He would not get a warm reception, but B, he would hear a variety of things that he doesn't want to hear because they have no solutions. Right. When the Border Patrol agents say, I need more physical infrastructure so that I can redeploy my assets better, he's going to have to look at him and say, well, I stopped all that. I'm not doing that any longer. That was a political promise I made during the campaign. So it doesn't matter if it's effective for you or not. I'm not doing it. Like these are the conversations that he would have to have, which is I know exactly why he's not going.
Yeah, it's funny because I think part of it is seeing it. Once you realize that you can't use the Jim Acosta talking point, that you watch these people come over. And it's funny because I know you're probably familiar with this book. It's Moving Forward. It's Corinne Jean-Pierre's book. But in it, she writes, I needed to go to the border and see what it was like for these children. I needed to bear witness to this injustice. She's talking about why she needed to go to the border because she needed to see it firsthand. And yet the president of the United States, I think, to your point, won't go there because once you see it, you can't unsee it. You can't say, I didn't recognize the reality of what's happening at the border.
Well, I'm not familiar with her book, so thanks for bringing that up. I'm not sure the context or the time frame.
I'm marking this down. Shad Wolf, Christmas, Moving Forward by Corinne Jean-Pierre.
When I was in service at DHS, I got a lot of incoming from the left about the number of individuals dying in Border Patrol custody, which in a 6-month span at one point during my tenure, we had 4 deaths. Today, there's about 2 deaths per day going on along that border because of what's occurring in that river and the amount of individuals coming across that border. So hopefully they're just as outraged as they were during the Trump administration as they are during the Biden administration. I'm not holding my breath on that front. So I think what this has really said is a lot of the left's outrage. And so whether it's the White House spokesperson or different congresswomen and men, it's all selective outrage at the end of the day. And so it's very political in nature. But I do agree with you, Sean. I think to go there, to experience, to smell it, to understand what what life is like on that border, it's very hard to then come back to DC and say, you know what, I'm going to ignore what I saw. You can't do that. But at the same time, one visit, even two visits, even a handful of visits really doesn't get you what you need unless you talk with the agents down there. You do a ride along from midnight to 3 a.m. and you see what they encounter, and then you see the impact of your policies have on what they do every day.
So I was listening to the new border chief in some interviews that he gave, and his whole point was Eagle Pass is where all these folks are coming in. It's almost like a shiny nickel that Border Patrol surges the resources to Eagle Pass to deal with this influx. But then the cartels go, great, we'll go 100 miles down the way and we'll bring in fentanyl, we'll bring in drug traffickers, we'll bring in people convicted of, sexual assault or sexual molestation or human trafficking or other criminals. From a DHS standpoint, from a national security standpoint, how concerned should we be about that?
Well, I think very concerned, particularly in the numbers that we see today. Look, this is a common tactic used by cartels and smugglers, which is to say, you distract Border Patrol and you distract them either with a large group of individuals crossing the border, or you send 3 or 4 individuals under the cover of night, into an area that's patrolled by CBP. You let them get caught. So basically you're sacrificing them so that Border Patrol then pools all their resources to that area. And then 20 miles down, or you could even just go 5 miles down the border, you are smuggling and trafficking more and more stuff, individuals and goods across that border. So this is a very common tactic. Border Patrol is very much aware of it. The problem, though, Sean, today is the fact that the vast majority, I would say 70 to 80% of Border Patrol assets are in Border Patrol facilities processing migrants, which is exactly where they should not be. We need 80 to 90 to 100% of them on the line so that they're plugging holes. And so you can't have this tactic the cartels use. But when you only have 10 to 15% of Border Patrol agents on the line, and so when they swarm an activity, such as an illegal border crossing, it leaves miles and miles and miles of the border wide open. The Biden administration knows this. They don't care. If they cared, they would do something different and they would change tactics.
So if Republicans right now asked you, how do we properly message what's happening at the border?
Yeah.
What is your advice?
Well, I would say 3 things. One, you've got to secure the border. You've got to end the human trafficking that's going on. And then we've got to get serious about the cartels, the Mexican cartels. I think most Americans would get behind all 3 of those, to differing degrees, of course. But I think most Americans, 80 to 90% of Americans say, yes, I need to secure the border better than it is today. Yes, we need to stop the human trafficking that's going on down there. And yes, the cartels are a problem. And so there's solution sets to all 3 of those. Again, the Biden administration is not interested actually in looking at that. And in fact, President Biden's taken off the table some very dramatic action that we could do against the cartels and has basically told President AMLO that he is not going to take any type of decisive action. And so in turn, the president of Mexico is not really taking any action for us and not doing their job to help stem this crisis either.
So you've got some candidates running for president on the Republican side that are talking about literally going in and treating the cartels either as a terrorist organization or declaring war on them. Is that a feasible option that you would support if you were DHS secretary and had to advise the president?
Yeah, what I would say is all options need to be on the table. We have now the cartels should be public enemy number 1, killing more Americans than anything else going on in the world today. And we need to stop admiring the problem, which we have now done for decades, and just kind of saying, well, it is what it is. We actually need to get serious about this. So I would look at, you can designate them as terrorist organizations. You can look at the use of military force. I would have hard conversations with the government of Mexico and say, I'm about to exercise all of these options because I cannot sit by and let Americans die day after day after day unless you want to do something dramatic on your side to help me stop this crisis. So I would always use these as leverage points. And again, President Biden's taken all of this off the table, so he has no leverage. which is why we see Mexico, the government of Mexico and the president of Mexico not doing much to help out at the end of the day. So they've come about this all wrong. But there are a number of things that you can do as you target the cartels.
I just think that I feel like, to your point about the messages, that Republicans are being too timid. I mean, there are people coming into our country that are bringing in drugs that we know of. This isn't like rhetoric. This is straight out of the border chief's mouth, that are coming in that have a criminal record, have trafficked children, have trafficked women. And I'm thinking to myself, I just can't believe there's not greater outrage. And I know the one thing that the Republicans did well from a messaging standpoint is they brought groups down to the border and the media was forced to cover it.
Yeah.
And I feel like it worked for a month and then they kind of faded away. I think that there's a degree to which Republicans need to step up and say, here's what is happening in your community in terms of fentanyl, child trafficking, potential criminals entering it. I don't get the sense. I joked about this yesterday, and I shouldn't say I joked. I pointed out the fact that the Today Show is leading with Taylor Swift attending a football game, which is cute, and I get that.
Yeah.
But the reality is that our nation is under attack. Our community is under attack. Eric Adams, the mayor of New York, is saying it, and yet there's almost a collective yawn.
Yeah. Well, so I don't disagree with any of that, Sean. I think in some instances, I think maybe the American people, and I would include congressmen and policymakers, have a little bit of border fatigue, right? So this has been going on now for 28 months. And it's like every month, other than a few months here and there, is worse than the previous month. And so you kind of get numb to it. And you're just like, well, it's out of control. And I don't think anything's going to change. I think that's actually the wrong approach. I've been very vocal. We need new leadership at the Department of Homeland Security. I think the steps that the secretary has taken, numerous of them are unlawful. And so there was a big push 3 or 4 months ago about really doing something about leadership at the department. I think that's on the back burner now as you look at some of the impeachment inquiries into President Biden, which is to say there's multiple things going on in the country all at the same time. And from my perspective, I love the border and the border crisis and the impact it's having on American communities to be front and center every day. It's just there's a lot of things going on that are taking people's time and attention. But I do think that border fatigue kind of syndrome, I think, is at play here. Yeah,
I agree. It's amazing how it went from impeach Mayorkas to, let's get Biden. And I get it. I mean, you can only do so many things. Let me ask you about a shutdown. I think there's no question it's inevitable Saturday night at midnight that we enter shutdown. How does that affect DHS writ large, not just at the border, but overall in terms of our nation's security?
Yeah, so many of the positions, particularly those along the border, Border Patrol and some of our customs officers down along the border, they're going to be exempt, Sean. They have national security positions. And so a good portion of the department, though not all of it, is exempt during a government shutdown. So the impact on DHS from a frontline activity is, I wouldn't say it's minimal, but it's minimal to the American public. Now, a lot of the back office stuff is shut down. Not everyone at headquarters in D.C. and elsewhere are national security positions. So there will be some impact, but it's not like Border Patrol officers won't show up the next day, particularly along the southern border that we're dealing with now, or customs officials won't show up the next day to let some of that legitimate trade and travel occur along the border. They will still show up, but as the longer the impact goes on, kind of the support functions behind them will obviously be shut down.
But it's got to impact morale, right? If you know that you might get paid in 2 weeks, but you're not going to get paid now, you're a little bummed.
Yeah.
I mean,
I think that's right. Look, a lot of these Border Patrol agents, the new ones will certainly be like, well, what's going on? Folks that have been through this time and time again, they kind of understand it.
Right.
Because the little known secret about a government shutdown is you get back pay.
Right.
So you're getting paid. It's not coming right away. And so if it's one paycheck or two paychecks, that starts to hurt. If it's beyond that, it really, really starts to hurt a lot of these agents. So we'll just have to see how long it goes.
Before we go, I want to switch gears for a second. From a national security and homeland security perspective, where do you put China in the current state of our relationships with our security. I feel like when President Biden got asked the other day, when the last time he talked to Xi Jinping, he was like, well, I talked to the traveling secretary. It was like a George Costanza moment. He was like, well, I talked to this deputy who said that he was going to give him a message. I think that's pretty scary.
100%. It's scary. Look, when I released during my last year at the Department of Homeland Security in 2020, a threat assessment that outlined the threats to the homeland as I saw them, given the intelligence that I was seeing. And I put China at the top of that list for a variety of different reasons that I'm happy to go into. But we need to keep our eye on the larger threat here. And while the border is absolutely a national security threat today, impacting and killing Americans today, I am hopeful that will be solved. But the Chinese threat, particularly from the Communist Party there in China, will be long lasting. And they attack us and they infiltrate us a variety of different ways. And so as I look at the security of the homeland, our economic security, right? What makes America great is our economic security and continues to lead the world in a variety of different ways. That is under attack mainly from the Communist Party of China.
But as an everyday American, are there things that we should be worried about right now, like in terms of the apps that we use, the way that we live our life?
Well, I think so. Technology is a great example of that. But the Chinese are also buying ag land, buying land against near major military installations all across this country. That should impact you, particularly if you live in those communities. They're using our visa system. The number of students over here that are Communist Party members, stealing intellectual property, stealing trade secrets and the like. All of this is happening kind of under the surface. So a lot of Americans don't see this, maybe don't interact with it every single day. But guess what? It is going on across this country every single day. And what I would say is, United States, we've got to do better playing that long game. We usually will tackle the immediate crisis right before our eyes, like kind of that 5-meter target. We need to be looking 50 meters out and what are the threats and what are the challenges that we're going to have in 4 to 5 to 6 years. And all of these from the Communist Party of China, we're going to have to deal with here.
Okay. Chad Wolf, I appreciate your time and your perspective, because right now with these challenges that we face both at the border in terms of China, there's no one better to have the perspective than you. Thank you for the work that you're doing over at America First Policy Institute. And obviously, I hope everyone tunes into the Tank podcast that you host over there as well.
Appreciate that. Thanks, Sean. Thanks for having me.
All right. Take care.